Hey everyone, let's get into some of the more subtle special effects of Electrolyte. Alright, so first let me show you what exactly is going on in this first scene. So we've got the baseball throwing, and he hits it, and notice right here, the ball kind of gets sharper. And this is because, you know, if the camera is panning with a ball, then naturally a ball would be sharper. There's still a tiny bit of motion blur, but not a whole lot. So, but then over here, by the time the camera stops, you don't even see the ball, but it's there somewhere. Here we go. Here's some motion blur of it, and then until it hits the glass and breaks it. So, what I could have just done is just taken, you know, just a simple picture of a baseball and then just, you know, keyframed it in there. But since we have a pan in the shot, we have to motion track the whole scene, so that way, you know, the ball will be sharper and it'll look like it's actually there in the scene. So let me open up the After Effects project here. Alright, so the first thing that I did is I went and I found an image of a baseball on Google Images, and I just spun it around in circles, you know, very basic. But then, and I also added an inner shadow to it so that, you know, the shadow that was taken with the ball wouldn't spin around with the ball. I added that. I don't even think it's noticeable since it's so small and it moves so fast, but, you know, I threw it in there. It's always good to pay attention to little details like that because lots of little layers to compositing do add up to help sell the shot. So I just threw it in there, even though that it may not be that great. And also, the broken glass here. So now it's a little bit more obvious here since this isn't color graded and this is just a black solid back here. But in the actual broken glass element, you can see that it is just completely transparent. So I could have just left it transparent, but you see it kind of looks off. And if it was broken glass, then it would be a lot darker within the room, and you wouldn't be able to see the reflections through it. So I went ahead and just simply masked in a little bit of a mask to, you know, just to kind of help sell that. And in the color graded shot here, you can see that it matches up quite nicely because, you know, the reflection all around it was darkened. So now, one of the reasons why we used a whip pan instead of just, you know, a basic cutaway is we are able to kind of draw the attention away from him hitting the ball, but that also makes it a little bit more complicated to motion track. So, and another problem with motion tracking is there's not one point on this screen that stays in the frame throughout the entire pan. So I needed to use more than one tracking point. Alright, so first off, I created a tracking point to analyze this part of the window. And then I went through and analyzed it as best as I could. I had to keep the outer region fairly wide since it moves pretty quickly here, and even then you can see that it goes off a bit. So, but you know, since it's such a quick pan, it doesn't matter a whole lot. So I went ahead and motion tracked that as best as I could throughout the entire scene. Even now it's like way farther below than what I originally had it, but this is as far as up as I could get it without having to expand the composition. So after I created this tracking data, I went ahead and applied it to a null, and so that was null 2 right here. So if I turn that null on, you can kind of see it in place. And then I created a new tracker for the corner of this house up here. It has a lot of contrast, and I had to keep the tracking point really wide because the pan moves so fast. So I went through, just kept that up for each of the parts where it's on frame, and then I also applied that to another null. And so with the tracking data applied, I can take my second null here and parent it to the first one. This way, this null will keep moving even though its tracking point is right off the screen because it's now using the motion data from the first null. So now this gives me something to have the baseball comp up here parented to that second null, so that way the whole motion points of it work. Let me show you guys what happens when I don't use any tracking data. So we've got this nice baseball here rotating around, and so let's start over here to where the baseball would probably launch, bring it off screen, and let's go ahead and turn on the clock for the position, and then way down to about right here where he hits the ball, we'll have that there, and then we'll swing over to when the window breaks. Let me turn that window breaking back on. There we go. So we can take that, put it right there, and let's go ahead and turn off the opacity for the next frame so that it looks like it's actually going in the window. So, and now let's go ahead and adjust these handlebars so that it looks like the baseball is actually going up in the air and back down. And I believe you hold the Alt key. Yep, there we go. So you throw the Alt key, but already you can kind of tell this is going to look ridiculous. So there we go, and let's just go in frame by frame. Let's move this keyframe back a little bit. So we've got that going in, and then he hits it, and and it just looks ridiculous. So let me bring this keyframe over just to, yeah, so you can see why we did not go with that route. So, but now, since I can parent this to that one null that's parented to the first null, now the ball will actually, you know, stay where it would be if I had the tracking data. So anyway, let's go ahead and grab that, the baseball, and bring it back over where it was supposed to. Hit the window, let's set the handlebar, and let's go in and set this handlebar as well. So both of them so that they're consistent. Scale's a bit big, so let me bring that down. There. So now when we play through it, now we've got something that looks like, see, it's the camera's panning a little fast, and then it catches up just like it would if I panned a little bit ahead of time. And the last final touch is to turn on motion blur. So now we can go through baseball. Ooh, wow, she threw that hard, and bam! So, and then the ball will come in, and there we go. So let me turn off that layer and turn back the original layer. So that's what I had to do to sell the shot, that to make sure that it would work. And fortunately, the pan is quick enough that I was able to just reposition the tracking points so that way, because it was really hard for it to track with, you know, the motion blur of the buildings, but it actually turned out quite nicely, and we were able to get it all in one shot instead of going the easy route, which would have been a cutaway. But then we would have had to get close on the window, and this window here is just an Action Essentials element, so it's kind of pretty easy to tell that it's fake. But yeah, so that's how we did that shot there, and so it was one of my more fun shots. Oh, one last thing is that there's also some rotoscoping that I did. So you can see that up here is just, I had to with the roto brush up here, I had to go in and rotoscope his hand out. So it would have been nice if I didn't have to do that, but so because it's kind of rough, you can kind of see that it doesn't quite match up exactly. And it looks like I could have blurred the glass a bit more because it doesn't quite match the sharpness of the lens we were using. So, but yeah. Alright, let's move on to the next one, and you may not have noticed this to be a special effect at all. Hopefully you didn't. Anyway, so it's this one shot here where, like, let's see. So we've got the video on the screen. So this was actually on the...
Oh yeah, so...
That was actually on the screen, and I just added a little bit of a muzzle flash as well as the little play logo right there. Just some simple After Effects scale, transparency, and blur right there. So, but here... The window down in here,
didn't say that.
The window down in there, that is actually a screen replace, even though that you can see reflections over it. And this part was even more trickier because if you notice, this laptop, we had it and the battery died on us. So notice we've got this laptop, and then we cut to this shot, and this is a MacBook Pro. So we shot this on a different day, and we had only this laptop available. It was just some sloppiness on our part. So, but anyway, let's get into how I was able to put this screen on the laptop. Oop, you can, if you look carefully, you can kind of notice the screen slipping. But, you know, we polished this film for like a month afterwards, and there just came to a point when we had to call it done so that we can work on the next semester's film. Alright, so the first thing that I did in this shot is I went and I created, I just created a simple image here, just a frozen frame of the video, and I slid it off a little bit to the left because it didn't quite look right in the center on the screen, so it just turned out to be that way with my tracking data. So anyway, the first thing that I did is I took that comp up here and I imported it in, and it's just a flat image here, and I then just kind of set it over there to the side, and then I motion tracked the screen over here. So this was just a simple track. It went very smoothly because there's a ton of contrast on that corner. So I just went through that whole thing and then applied it to a tracking null that I created, and so that allowed the null to stick to the corner of the screen. So then I took the image and I parented it to that null so that way it sticks with it. Then I converted it to a 3D layer and just went and repositioned it with the rotations down here until I got a nice image. So the tilt probably matches about there. And I just kept doing this until it looked about right. And then I matched it up as best as I could. There we go. So now it should stick in there with the scene. So thankfully, there was no perspective shifts or anything going on here. Otherwise, I probably would have had to 3D track it. But this was relatively simple here because this was just right on there. And then anyway, the final touch was just to go into a screen blending mode and choose the screen, which takes out the blacks. So that way, any of the reflections, the lighter reflections on the screen would just show on top of it. So, and it worked out quite nicely. So, and one final touch is I just went in and added a basic Gaussian blur to it to fit with the depth of field that we currently had on the shot. So I believe 3 pixels was it? And that's really all I needed to help sell that shot. And so let's take off that rough one, and then this is the one that I ended up using. So now for the complicated part. This was really tricky because this actually does move in 3D space. And this one, I couldn't just track camera because, you know, the camera's not moving. It wouldn't have any perspective differentiation to detect any 3D objects. So I went in and I used the perspective corner pin tool. So right here, these tracking points up here, so perspective corner pin is down in here and it gives you 4 tracking points. And I was able to track each of the corners very easily. But, unfortunately, a good chunk of the screen got cropped off because we were shooting this in 2.35. And after I already started motion tracking, I was like, oh, if I had just brought in the original file, which is in 16:9, I would have been able to track all of this, but I was halfway through it, and I was like, well, this section of the video, this corner of the screen was probably cut off anyway, so I was going to have to go through it anyway. So these tracking points, I had to go in manually and just guess where each frame lines up. And this is why the image slips a little bit on the screen. I had to guide this tracking point too. So that's a very important lesson that I learned, that if you're going to do any kind of screen replacement like this, or you know you're going to have to do it, is make sure that all 4 corners are in frame, because then you could just throw it into this perspective corner pin. Otherwise, you need to open up After Effects Mocha and mess with all that stuff there. But I was on the camera that was facing Sean over here. So I was on this camera, and my assistant was on the other camera, so I wasn't aware of where it should be. If we had more crew, I could have set up an external monitor and analyzed both shots, and that would have been very helpful, because my whole goal is that it would just be enough off the frame that we couldn't tell what was on the screen until the shot that we needed to show it in, but it was clearly on the screen. So anyway, I then took the video clip down again and popped it on there and So I then, instead of taking this into a 3D layer, with the perspective corner pin tool, I was able to just edit the target of the comp, and then apply it, and then it just sticks it right there on the screen. So the tracking points were a little bit off, but you can, and it slips a little bit, and there, I got it right underneath the webcam, which is why I slid it over here on the left. But then come to think of it, the webcam may not have been centered, but it probably was. So the next thing to do was just to apply the screen blending mode again, so which worked very nicely because it was already kind of a dark video, and all the reflections showed up nicely on it. And then, of course, just adding a Gaussian blur. So the tedious part was applying the motion tracking from the perspective tool and the perspective corner pin tool in the motion tracker. So, but, oh, and then one last touch that I did is about right here. I went into the transparency, brought it all the way down, and then had it fade in as it comes in. So it actually looks like, you know, you just can't see anything from that angle until it gets closer. So yes, that's what we had to do, which would have saved us a ton of time if we had just planned better, gotten a better battery, gotten the video clip ahead of time, and so. Alright, so the final special effect is one that you guys probably didn't notice at all, so I was quite pleased with how I was able to clean it up. So it's here in the bowling alley, and it wasn't this, you know, this zapping special effect here. That one, we were trying to make the bowling ball actually go faster when he zapped it, but, you know, well, and we may or may not have communicated that. But anyway, so right here, we actually had a black spot on his shirt because we painted these logos on the night before, and someone laid the shirts on top of each other before they were finished drying, so there was actually some black spots on there. Fortunately enough, this cut didn't actually make it into the film, but yeah, you can clearly see that white spot in this uncolor graded shot. And one thing that I learned is that always color grade, or at least just throw a basic S-curve on your footage before motion tracking. It helps After Effects out a lot to know what range of levels to look for. So even though that all the data is there, it's taking in all the range of blacks to whites. And if you're shooting, and if you're motion tracking a really flat image, then it struggles a little bit sometimes. But if you narrow it in with an S-curve and increase the contrast, it helps a lot. But anyway, so I was able to motion track this without it. So yeah, first thing that I did is I motion tracked it. So fortunately this was fairly simple to do. Even though that it was flat, there was still a lot of contrast here. So I first motion tracked it, and I couldn't just slap a solid on it because, you know, the color changes a little bit, and there's, you know, a tiny bit of grain, a little speckle that is there. So I wanted to use a different part of his shirt. So what I first did is I duplicated the layer and I just shifted it up over a little bit. That way there is another area that I can use to cover up this black spot. So, and then I created just a simple white solid with lots of feathering on it. So it's just a mask with feathering, and I paired that to my tracking null, which has the tracking data on it. So when I play it through, this white spot follows him, and then I had to adjust the mask for when he rotates over. So, and then I just used this white solid as a mask, because the advantage with using this method is that you can apply, you know, a white solid to parent with a tracking null, and you can't do that with just a basic, you know, mask down here. So anyway, after I went to my duplicated layer here, and I just converted that to apply with the mask. So if I turn off the spot below here, you can kind of see that the white, that the mask, which is applied to the tracking data, moves around with his shirt. So that way, since the image was moved over, and then I can also still move this around and whatnot, and I can use different parts of his shirt. You can kind of see the cutout there. That way, when it goes through, you know, it's using a different portion of this shirt, and it covers most of it up. So I didn't spend too much time on this because we ended up not using the shot, but that is what I did. Oop, kind of rough there, but definitely had to use it here because this showed up in the shot very nicely. Or unnicely, as you can tell. Here you can see the mask just to the right of the point. So, but then after I applied it as a mask, then it stuck over it. So, yes, that was some more sloppiness on our part, but we were able to correct it in post fairly seamlessly, and so I was quite pleased with the result over here. But yeah, so there are some of the more subtle special effects. There were a lot more. We spent hours doing so much rotoscoping. But yes, it's always great to learn what is required to fix something in post. It's nice to have the option there, but if you can avoid it, and sometimes we just gotta learn the hard way, and now I'm kind of rambling on about it. But yeah, so I was very pleased with some of the results that we were able to get by fixing things in post, which is, yeah, you never want to hear that on set. At least, unless you're planning for it. But anyway, so I hope you guys learned a few things of the stuff that we had to go through with Electrolyte. If you want to check out some more behind-the-scenes videos, I've got some listed in the description below and in some annotations. And if you want, you can subscribe to be notified of future videos. Thanks for watching!
So what, we're bad planners, Billy Hansen? That's not what you want to do. Lauren Havard is a bad director. Just kidding.